Once upon a time, there lived a boy named Iffy, who lived in the city with his father. He was a very curious boy, and his father pampered and praised him for everything he did, no matter how wrong it was. From the moment Iffy could talk, he had no filter. If he thought something, he said it out loud, whether it was rude, embarrassing, or even hurtful. At school, everyone knew Iffy for his loud mouth. Teachers dreaded Iffy in class because they knew that he would interrupt lessons with his odd and rude questions. One day in class, Iffy asked his teacher why he had hair in his nose. He asked another teacher why she wore the same shoes every day. And these questions, although true, did more harm than good. His classmates stayed away from him completely because he often said things that embarrassed or insulted them. Once during assembly, Iffy pointed at a girl and asked her why her ears were so big. It didn't end there, as he went on to say to her that her ears were so big that they could hear the next week coming. The poor girl cried for days and began to complain to her parents that she hated her ears. The poor girl's parents, seeing how Iffy's words affected their daughter, decided to pay his father a visit to lay a complaint about his son. But Iffy's father, instead of rebuking his son, brushed off their complaints as nothing. "If you want your children to be timid, that's fine. My son Iffy is bold, confident, and free. That's what we need in this world, and I'm not ready to box him up." The girl's parents were so disappointed. They left Iffy's home and withdrew their daughter from the school to enable her heal emotionally and avoid further humiliation. More parents began to complain, and the school decided to step in. They called for a meeting with his father to talk about his son's attitude, but instead of listening, he accused the school of discriminating against his son. Filled with so much rage, he withdrew his son from the school, promising to find a school which will allow his son to freely express himself. He walked out of the principal's office with Iffy proudly by his side, convinced that everyone else was the problem, never for once pausing to consider the damage that his son's words had caused. Soon after, Iffy was enrolled in a new school. His father believed that this would be a fresh start for him, a chance to show others how brilliant and bold his son truly was. But things did not go the way he expected. From the very first day, Iffy resumed his usual behavior. He saw a fat lady and asked her why she had to eat her whole family to prove a point. The woman broke down in tears, remembering her daughter whom she recently lost to a fatal illness. She knew Iffy was only a boy, but his joke opened a wound that had barely begun to heal. Everyone around watched in shock. Some even covered their mouth, whilst others looked away in disappointment. Still, his father refused to act. He continued to defend his son, boasting proudly to anyone that cared to listen that he was raising a confident child and not a timid follower. But what he failed to realize was that confidence without kindness was just cruelty in a mask. One evening, his father received a very special visitor. Her name was Lola, and she was an extremely beautiful woman who his father had been talking to for a while. Lola had heard so much about Iffy and could not wait to meet him. She arrived their home and met Iffy, who welcomed her with a soft smile. Iffy stared at her from the moment she walked in, eyes wide with curiosity. Without thinking twice, he asked her a question that she never saw coming. "Why is your makeup so heavy? Are you trying to hide your real face?" The room fell silent as Lola froze in shock, her smile fading in an instant. His father let out an awkward laughter, but Lola did not seem amused. She simply stood up from her chair, picked up her purse, and gave excuses why she had to leave. In that instant, Iffy's father rushed after her, pleading that Iffy was just a child. "He's just a child. He didn't mean it that way," he said to Lola, who turned to him looking so disappointed. "He may be a child, Wally, but you're not. And if this is how you've raised him to treat people, then I'm sorry. I can't be a part of it." With that, she got into her car and drove off, leaving Wally standing at the door with shame slowly creeping into his chest. For the very first time, he walked back inside and saw Iffy still sitting on the couch completely unbothered. Why did she leave father? Iffy asked with an innocent voice, but his father Wally did not respond. He just sat down and buried his face in his hands, sad that he could not caution his son Iffy. He believed that doing so would destroy the confidence that he had worked so hard to build in him. One Saturday afternoon, Wally decided to take his son to the supermarket to buy some groceries when the unthinkable happened. Wally was pushing the trolley whilst his son Iffy trailed beside him, asking loud, unnecessary questions. As they approached the till to pay for the items in their trolley, a well-dressed woman walked past them, tall, curvy, and elegant. Wally, without even thinking, turned slightly to glance at her, and just as loud as a megaphone in a quiet church, shouted to the hearing of everyone present, "Daddy, why are you looking at her boom boom?" The queue went silent as the cashier froze. Wally could feel his heart stop. He had never been this embarrassed in his life and wished for the ground to open and swallow him up. The woman he had looked at turned sharply and looked at him. People began to chuckle as they whispered amongst themselves and pointed at him. "This man peekin' no get break for mouth, though," one man said as Wally stared at his son angrily. "But Daddy, you are looking at her bum-bum. You even turn your neck as she walked past," he said aloud as people burst out in laughter ridiculing them. Wally abandoned the items that he had come to buy and left the supermarket with his son. Despite the embarrassment, Wally still found it hard to correct his son. He made excuses for him, stating that his son was only telling the truth. What Wally did not know was that the small tiger that he was taming would one day bite his ass in a way that he never expected. Wally took Iffy to a government office to get some paperwork sorted. The queue was long, and the air was tense with frustration as people waited impatiently for their turn. Iffy, as usual, wandered around the office asking loud questions. He pointed at an old man and asked why his teeth looked like broken corn. He saw a pregnant woman and asked if she was having 10 babies at once. People frowned, but Wally was already used to their reaction. They arrived at the office of the high-ranking government official who was in charge of approving Wally's building contract. Iffy sat quietly in the corner as his father had a brief discussion with the government official. There was a contract that his father was diligently pursuing, and he had done everything to ensure it was approved, even things that he wasn't proud of. After signing some documents, the official assured him that his file will be submitted to the right people for approval. Wally was so delighted to hear this. He appreciated the man for all his help and thanked him as he stood up to leave with his son. Wally left the man's office with his son by his side. They walked out of the office, passing a long corridor where people were seated, some conversing, whilst others were quietly minding their businesses as they approached the exit. Iffy stopped and shouted with his usual unfiltered tone, "Daddy, why did you give that man so much money? Is it not bribery?" Heads turned as people began to stare. Wally froze as he slowly turned to his son, trying to cover his mouth to stop him from talking, but it was already too late. A tall, dark-skinned woman in full military uniform had just walked past them. Her name was Colonel Ina Coy, a well-respected anti-corruption officer known across the country for her fierce stance against bribery. She stopped in her tracks and turned back to look at them. Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me," she said, stepping towards Wally and Iffy. "What did your son just say?" Wally stuttered, sweating. "Ah, no, Ma, he's just a child. He doesn't know what he's saying." Near me, unaware of the storm that he had just unleashed, boldly stepped forward and said to the woman, "I saw my daddy giving that man a big brown envelope. I saw it. He said that if he doesn't give him money, they won't approve his building contract." Okoy turned to her assistant and ordered him to follow them, get a search warrant for the office they just left, and make sure that the brown envelope is found in less than 10 minutes. Wally was surrounded by anti-corruption officers. The envelope was found, and Wally was arrested for bribery. Wally did not even fight it. He looked down at his son Iffy, who had tears in his eyes, and for the first time, Wally regretted everything. Not just the bribe, not just the embarrassment, but the years he had spent defending Iffy's bad behavior, the pride he mistook for confidence, and the refusal to correct his son when it mattered most, as he was handcuffed and led away. Wally turned to his son with a heavy heart. "Son, there's a difference between being bold and being wise. I should have taught you better," he said, as they whisked him away. Iffy watched as his father was placed in a black van and driven away, his small chest rising and falling quickly as confusion filled his eyes. He didn't understand what had just happened. Where did he go wrong? He was only seeing what he saw, like his father always encouraged. But now Daddy was gone by evening. The police had called his father's sister to come take custody of him. Auntie Bola was Wally's elder sister. She was nothing like his father, Wally, who condoned his excesses. Auntie Bola was strict, firm, and believed so much in discipline. She was a school teacher who had raised 3 respectful children and was well known in her community for being a no-nonsense woman. The moment Iffy arrived, she welcomed him with a plate of rice and a warning: in this house, we do not speak carelessly here. Your mouth must be wiser than your age. From that day, Iffy's life changed completely. There were rules. There was routine, and there were boundaries. If Iffy spoke out of turn, he had to kneel and reflect for 10 minutes. If he made a rude comment, he had to write 100 lines of apology every evening. He had to share something kind that he said during the day, or he went to bed without dinner. At first, Iffy resisted. He soaked, cried, and even tried to talk back. But Auntie Bola remained unmoved. Your mouth almost sent your father to his grave. It won't destroy another life under my roof, she said. To Iffy, who stood quietly for the first time in his life, unsure of what to say. The following days were hard, as Iffy was no longer the center of attention. No one laughed at his rude jokes or called him bold or smart. For the first time, he began to feel what others had felt all along, hurt one morning while helping to sweep the compound. Iffy saw a small girl trip and fall. Normally, he would have shouted something silly like, "Are you trying to dig a hole with your nose?" But something stopped him, his auntie's firm warnings, so instead of laughing, he rushed to help her up. "Are you okay?" Iffy asked the girl, who looked at him in surprise and thanked him for his help. Iffy felt a sudden wave of happiness that he had never felt before. It was so different from how he felt whenever he said unkind words to others or laughed at them when something bad happened. That small moment sparked something new in Iffy, who walked back into the house that day with a quiet smile on his face. That night, as usual, Auntie Bola sat with him at the dinner table and asked her daily question. "Iffy, what is one kind thing you said today?" Iffy looked down at his phone, then slowly raised his head and said, "I helped the girl who fell, and I asked if she was okay, and she smiled." For the first time, Auntie Bola's tin face softened into a warm smile. "That's the kind of boldness the world needs," she said to Iffy, who smiled back as they continued their food. Weeks turned into months, and the boy who once thought to others down with his words began to build them up. He stopped blurting out every thought, asked permission before speaking, learned to compliment others, and thought twice before he said any word. Auntie Bola was so grateful for how far Iffy had come. She watched him silently with pride as he transformed into a respectable young man. One Sunday afternoon, Auntie Bola took Iffy to visit his father in prison. Wally looked thinner, older, and quieter than Iffy remembered the moment he saw his son walking. His eyes welled up with tears. Iffy rushed into his arms, holding him tightly. "Daddy, I've been learning how to talk better. I even helped someone and didn't make fun of them," he said proudly, as Wally pulled back and looked at his son. His lips trembled, but he managed to smile. "I'm proud of you, son. Keep it up, and always listen to your auntie." There was a long pause before Wally continued to speak. "I wish I had taught you earlier that the truth is not just about saying what you see, but knowing how and when to say it." Iffy nodded slowly, finally beginning to understand, as he walked out of the correctional center hand in hand with his Auntie Bola. Iffy looked up at the sky. He didn't know what the future held for his father, but he knew what. He wanted for himself not just to be bold, but to be kind, to be wise, and to be remembered. Not for his mouth, but for his heart. And so Iffy continued not as the boy who said everything he thought, but as the boy who learned to think before he spoke. The lesson to be learned from this story is that words are powerful. Raising a child without teaching them how to use their words wisely is like handing them a sword with no training. It may not cut them, but it will surely hurt someone else. Confidence without kindness is cruelty. Truth without wisdom is dangerous, and children become what we celebrate. So raise them not to be loud, but to be thoughtful, compassionate, and wise. I hope you enjoyed the story.